A ball rolled through dust and dreams. A boy chased it barefoot between trash fires and broken fences. He wasn't tall. He wasn't rich. But there was something in the way he moved, like gravity bowed to him. This isn't just a story about goals and glory. This is the kind of story that hides between the headlines, whispered through alleyways, memory, and myth. This is the Sport Whisper. And it begins with Diego. Villa Fiorito, the mud and the magic. You don't choose your birthplace. Diego Armando Maradona didn't ask for Villa Fiorito, but Villa Fiorito made him. It didn't raise him gently or offer much in the way of comfort. What it gave him was sharper, the kind of love that bruises, the kind of lessons that come wrapped in noise and hunger. It was the outskirts of Buenos Aires, but to him, it was the center of the world. A world made of dust and sweat and improvisation, where everything was borrowed, broken, or barely holding together. Tin roofs that rattled when the wind blew, alleys that smelled like smoke and meat and garbage, soccer balls made from socks and string, and dreams that felt too big to say out loud. He was born on October 30th, 1960, in a house that wasn't really a house, more like a shelter that happened to have a door. 5 children already, with 3 more to come. The walls were thin, the roof leaked, and the floor was mostly dirt. But inside, there was something stronger than brick or cement. There was his mother, Doña Tota, quiet in voice, unshakable in will, and his father, Chitoro, who came home every night coated in cement dust, tired but proud, too stubborn to break. They didn't have money. They didn't even always have enough food. But they had each other, and they had that thing poor families often carry like armor, refusal. A refusal to give up, to complain, to let the world know just how close the edge really was. In that setting, Diego didn't just grow, he exploded. He wasn't one of those silent kids who stare at the ground and obey instructions. He was a spark, a noise, a blur. He asked questions without waiting for answers. He kicked everything, pebbles, cans, crumpled paper, even shadows. By the age of 3, he had his first makeshift ball, made by his cousin using old socks, plastic bags, and newspaper. That ball followed him everywhere. He kicked it while eating, sleeping, walking, even talking. And when it finally tore apart, he cried like he'd lost a limb. His siblings joked he was part dog, part bird, always chasing something, always in the air. He ran before he walked properly, climbed before he understood gravity. And when he found the ball, it wasn't just a toy. It was a magnet, a purpose, a secret that only he could hear. His sisters remember calling him in for dinner and hearing him yell back, "One more goal," as if he were already playing in a stadium with tens of thousands watching. There's a story. No one knows if it's true, but no one doubts it either. That at age 4, he juggled a grapefruit for 50 touches without letting it fall. In Villa Fiorito, stories worked like that. You didn't need proof. You just needed witnesses. And the streets were full of them. Older boys trying to knock him over. Grown men pausing to stare at this tiny kid with an afro and bare feet, dancing with a ball like he was born doing it. His playgrounds weren't fields. They were gravel lots, construction sites, whatever empty space he could find between shacks and train tracks. He played barefoot on glass and nails, dodging holes and rocks, his feet becoming maps of bruises and cuts. But he didn't care. He had the ball. The ball made everything else disappear. It was his toy, his friend, his shield. In a life where nothing was guaranteed, the ball obeyed him. It did what he asked, and sometimes even more. And slowly, the neighborhood began to notice. He wasn't polite on the pitch. He didn't ask for passes or apologize for stealing the ball. He took it, kept it, protected it like a secret. Other kids might have had better shoes or bigger bodies, but he had balance, fury, and imagination. He didn't dribble past you. He embarrassed you. He didn't shoot. He punished. And yet, there was joy in his face, like he wasn't trying to prove anything, like he was simply doing what he was born to do. At age 7, he caught the eye of a man connected to a local youth team, Estrella Roja. They offered him a spot, mostly because they needed players, and Diego seemed willing. His first jersey hung off him like curtains. But once the match started, the loose fit didn't matter. He ran like he was chasing the horizon. He moved like gravity had different rules for him. After one game, the coach simply asked, "Where did he learn that?" And the answer came from his father, standing with arms crossed and a cigarette burning low. "Out there," he said, nodding toward the dirt lot behind their house. Then came Los Cebolitas, the Little Onions. A strange name for a youth team, but they were legends in their own way. Fierce, fast, raw. Francisco Cornejo was the coach. He heard whispers about a small kid with big eyes and ridiculous skill. When he saw Diego for the first time, he didn't ask questions. He just said, "He's in." No tryout, no forms, just instinct. At 8 years old, Diego was playing against kids twice his age. Not just playing, dominating. He slipped between defenders like water between fingers. He juggled, feinted, danced, and smiled while doing it. Cornejo would later say, "He wasn't a child. He was a spirit in disguise." That might sound poetic, but to anyone who watched him, it made perfect sense. Los Cebolitas went on an unbeaten run of over 100 games, with Diego as the heart of the machine. Spectators started showing up just to watch him warm up. Old men who didn't even like football leaned against fences to see what the fuss was about. Mothers brought their children and pointed, "That one. That's Diego, watch him. He's different." And he was. Not because he scored the most goals, although he often did, but because he played like he was telling a story. A story only he understood and the rest of us were lucky enough to witness. But back home, nothing changed. Same tiny house, same thin meals, same nights with leaky roofs and borrowed electricity. Except now, there was something else. A flicker, a belief, not just in Diego, but through him. His sisters walked him to practice. His father took days off work to travel to away games. His mother made sure his only pair of cleats were always spotless, even if her own shoes were falling apart. And Diego? He carried that belief without complaint. Not out of duty, but out of love. Because in his world, where so much was fragile and unfair, the ball was his proof that something beautiful could still be controlled. That magic was real, if only for 90 minutes at a time. There's a photo. It's black and white, slightly blurry. It shows a barefoot boy with a mop of curly hair juggling a ball in a dirt field, surrounded by tin shacks and trash. He's smiling, not like someone pretending to be happy, but like someone who doesn't yet know how much the world is going to ask of him. But for now, none of that mattered. There were no crowds, no cameras, no contracts. Just a boy and a ball, and the feeling that when the ball was at his feet, everything else, the hunger, the cold, the noise, just went quiet. And that silence? That was the beginning of everything. He was still just a teenager when he walked into La Bombonera for the first time. The stands felt alive, breathing, like the stadium had a soul of its own. And the moment he pulled on that blue and gold shirt, something shifted. This was no longer a dream. This was Boca. He had already played professional football. He had already dazzled crowds, shrugged off defenders, and made hardened men shake their heads in disbelief. Argentinos Juniors had been his first stage, and he had lit it up like a neighborhood firework. Bright, loud, impossible to ignore. But deep down, Diego never saw La Paternal as home. It wasn't about disrespect. It was about identity. And identity for him meant Boca, not River Plate, Not even Barcelona, who were already sniffing around with European money. Boca Juniors, La Bombonera, blue and gold, sweat and song. It was where the poor cheered the loudest, where the terraces vibrated with drums and tears, where football wasn't entertainment. It was religion. And for a boy who had grown up in the dust and defiance of Villa Fiorito, it was the only place that ever made sense. In 1981, after years of headlines, magic, and frustration at Argentinos, he got his wish. The deal was complicated. Boca had no real money. They were broke in the way only big clubs can be. Rich in legend, poor in practice. But they moved heaven and earth to bring him in. Sponsors were summoned, contracts rewritten, promises made. And Diego, still only 20, walked into La Bombonera not as a prospect, not even as a player, but as a prophecy. The day he was unveiled, the stadium wasn't just full. It overflowed. Thousands spilled into the stands, chanting his name before he'd touched the ball. He walked out in the blue and gold kit, hair wild, grin unstoppable, waving like a king returning from exile. He juggled the ball casually, flicked it in the air, kissed the crest. And the crowd? The crowd roared like a city on fire. This wasn't a press conference. It was a coronation. The team at the time was in flux. Boca hadn't won a league title in years. The money problems were real. The squad was a mix of aging veterans and raw youth. But none of that mattered, because they had him. And in Argentina, when you have a Maradona, you have hope. His debut came in February against Talleres. The stadium trembled from the moment he stepped onto the pitch. Every time he touched the ball, the stands leaned forward. He didn't score that day, but he danced, moved like the grass whispered secrets to him. He was faster, smarter, more dangerous than anyone else on the field. Boca won 4-1. And it began. He scored his first Boca goal just days later, a penalty calmly slotted, arms raised to the crowd like a preacher offering proof. Then came the free kicks, the back heels, the passes so precise they felt premeditated. And most of all, the connection, not just between him and his teammates, but between him and the people. You didn't have to be a football expert to see it. You could be a butcher in La Boca, a school kid in Retiro, a grandmother in Rosario watching on a flickering black and white TV. You knew what you were seeing. You knew this wasn't just talent. It was alchemy. A player who took the ball and turned it into music. A player who moved like he carried every barrio on his back and wanted to make them proud. And the people loved him for it. He didn't act like a star. He didn't hide behind handlers or wear sunglasses indoors. He rode the bus. He ate at corner Perillas. He signed autographs until his fingers cramped. He talked to reporters like they were cousins. He hugged kids. He told jokes. He swore too much. He was real. And in a country battered by dictatorship, fear, and silence, being real meant everything. There's a story from that first season, probably true, maybe not, about a man who walked from Córdoba to Buenos Aires just to watch him play. Not Boca, not the team, just Diego. When asked why, the man said, "Because when he plays, I remember who I am." That season, the goals piled up. The performances dazzled. He would collect the ball near the halfway line, shimmy past 2, maybe 3 defenders, draw another in just to embarrass him, then send a teammate through with a pass so gentle it looked like a caress. He played with joy, but also with bite. He didn't back down from tackles, didn't tolerate dirty play. He could throw an elbow as quickly as a feint. And that edge, that fury, made the people love him more. By mid-season, Boca were flying. The Bombonera became a fortress again. Songs rained down from the terraces like confetti. Old men cried. Teenagers painted number 10 on their backpacks. And Diego? He grew into the shirt, no longer a kid from Fiorito playing in Boca's colors. He became Boca. He didn't just represent them, he embodied them. One match defined it all: the Super Clasico against River Plate, the Derby of derbies. Buenos Aires didn't sleep that week. Radios screamed predictions. Taxi drivers argued over lineups. And in the dressing room, Diego sat with his head down, silent, lacing his boots like a soldier preparing for war. River had money, stars, and arrogance. Boca had chaos, scars, and Diego. When the whistle blew, it was bedlam. The noise was thick enough to taste. And then, in the 45th minute, it happened. A deflected shot bounced his way. He flicked it over the keeper with one touch, walked it into the net, and turned to the fans with arms wide. A grin split across his face like a kid who just pulled off the perfect prank. La Bombonera shook. River's defense collapsed. Boca won 3-0. That goal was replayed on loop for months. But it wasn't the goal itself. It was the swagger, the joy, the sheer defiance of it. After that game, he wasn't just Boca's star. He was the country's. You couldn't walk a block without seeing his face on posters, newspapers, murals. Babies were named Diego. Men lined up for haircuts that mimicked his curls. He became a mirror for the people. Someone who came from nothing and now stood at the top, not with politeness, but with fire. He didn't ask permission. He took the stage and danced. And yet, through it all, he stayed rooted. He still visited his family in Villa Fiorito, still hugged his mother tight and kissed his father's dusty hands, still laughed with his sisters like nothing had changed. Because to him, nothing had. Not really. The world had shifted around him. But inside, he was still the barefoot kid with the sock ball, chasing joy through dirt and dream. That 1981 season ended with Boca lifting the Metropolitano title. It wasn't the most important trophy of Diego's career, not by far, but it was the first that felt like a shared victory. Him and the people, him and the city, him and the stadium that echoed his name like a hymn. He stood on the balcony with the team, confetti in the air, the sun setting over Buenos Aires, and he looked out over the crowd, thousands, maybe more, chanting, crying, celebrating. And for a moment, just a flicker, he looked overwhelmed. Not scared, not sad, just full of something no camera could catch, something beyond football. Because for Diego, Boca wasn't just a club, it was a heartbeat. Spain was the promised land. Big clubs, big contracts, bigger pressure, and for a young man from the barrios of Buenos Aires, it was a different kind of chaos. Barcelona welcomed him like a king. But no throne is ever comfortable for long. When the deal was finally done, it made headlines across 2 continents. The most expensive transfer in football history. Diego Armando Maradona, Argentina's golden boy, was going to Barcelona. A prince leaving the barrio for the palace. The numbers were surreal. $7.6 million, a figure so large it felt fictional. But Barcelona wasn't paying for just a player. They were paying for myth, for magic, for the promise that football itself might change shape with one left foot. He was only 21. The move felt like destiny. Spain was still shaking off the shadow of Franco, eager to rebrand itself as modern, glamorous European. And Maradona, with his curls, charisma, and chaos, fit the fantasy. When he arrived at El Prat Airport, the crowd waiting wasn't just large, it was frantic. Fans pushed past security, journalists shouted, cameras flashed like lightning. A police escort barely got him through the madness. And when he finally stepped out in front of the Camp Nou, holding up the red and blue shirt, the stadium erupted like they had already won the league. But from the start, it was complicated. He didn't speak the language, he didn't understand the politics. Barcelona was fractured, beautiful on the surface, bitter underneath. The club was a mosaic of Catalan pride, Spanish pressure, boardroom tension, and tabloid obsession. The dressing room was cold, not openly hostile, but distant. Many players saw him as a threat, not a teammate. He had been brought in not to fit in, but to fix everything. And he tried. God, he tried. On the field, he delivered moments that felt unreal. Goals that twisted physics, passes that bent through space. His first season began with sparks. Against Real Madrid, he scored a goal so calm it looked like time slowed down, rounded the keeper, walked the ball in, and stood arms outstretched like a statue of defiance. In another match, he dribbled past the entire Las Palmas defense as if they were cones, then chipped the ball over the charging goalkeeper like it was nothing at all. The Spanish press loved him, until they didn't. One day, he was the savior. The next, a liability. Rumors swirled. He was partying too much, missing curfews, clashing with coaches. He was seen at nightclubs with sunglasses on indoors. He was photographed dancing, laughing, living too loudly. Some stories were exaggerated, others weren't. But Diego was Diego. All fire, no filter. He didn't do caution. He didn't do quiet. Then came the hepatitis. Midway through his first season, he collapsed with fever and fatigue. Diagnosed quickly, sidelined indefinitely. For months, he lay in bed, weak, restless, angry. The newspapers circled like vultures. Some said it was a cover for bad behavior. Others whispered about drugs. He read the headlines, tossed the papers away, and stared at the ceiling. By the time he returned, something had shifted. He looked sharper, thinner, more determined, but also more distant. He no longer tried to win hearts. He just wanted to win games. His second season began with promise. A goal here, a dribble there. The fans still adored him. Kids still waited outside the training ground for autographs. But something hung in the air. Tension, fragility, a sense that the clock was ticking. And then, on a cold night in Bilbao, it happened. September 24th, 1983. A match against Athletic Club. The kind of physical, ferocious game that felt like war disguised as sport. Their defender, Andoni Goicoechea, had a nickname. The Butcher of Bilbao. He lived up to it. Midway through the match, Maradona received the ball in midfield. He turned, accelerated, saw a flash of white and red, and then pain. Goicoechea came in late and high, his stud slamming into Diego's ankle with a force meant to break. And it did. The bone cracked. The ligaments tore. Maradona hit the ground like a felled tree, screaming. Players ran over, some to help, some to yell. The referee looked away. Goicoechea walked off without even a yellow card. Diego was carried off the field, leg dangling, mouth open in disbelief. At the hospital, the diagnosis was brutal: a shattered ankle and torn tendons. Months of recovery. A season in pieces. The club fumed. The fans mourned. The player? He disappeared behind painkillers and silence. Rehab was slow, agonizing. But he came back. And when he did, something inside him had changed again. He no longer looked for smiles in the stands. He didn't wave to cameras. He moved with a new kind of fire. Less joyful, more exacting. He had tasted European football not as an art form, but as a battlefield. And then came the cup final. Copa del Rey. 1984. Again, against Bilbao. Again, against Goicoechea. The match itself was tense, ugly. No beauty, only violence. The tackles were hard, the whistles constant. Bilbao won 1-0. But no one remembers the score. What they remember is the explosion. At the final whistle, insults were exchanged. One of Bilbao's players mocked Maradona's family. Another made racist comments about South Americans. And then, the chaos. Diego snapped. He launched a flying knee into one player, punched another, kicked a third. His teammates joined. Bilbao retaliated. It became a brawl. A full-on riot on the pitch, broadcast live across Spain. Players tumbling, swinging, shouting. Security stormed the field. Kids in the stands cried. Reporters scrambled. It lasted minutes, but felt like hours. The next day, every paper carried the image. Maradona, wild-eyed, being dragged away, mouth open mid-roar. That moment, raw, primal, unforgettable, became his Spanish epitaph. Barcelona had had enough. The president wanted him gone. The coaches agreed. Even some fans, those who once screamed his name, now whispered about madness. They didn't understand. Or maybe they did, and it scared them. He had come as a savior. He left as a scandal. And yet, those 2 years in Spain had changed him. Not because they crowned him. They didn't. But because they burned him. Showed him the price of brilliance, the weight of fame, the cruelty of expectation. He arrived as a boy full of magic. He left as a man full of scars. But he wasn't finished. Not even close. Naples wasn't just a club. It was a call. A cry from the south. Poor, wild, burning with hunger. When Diego landed, it wasn't for money or trophies. It was something else. A connection. A mirror. And from the moment he wore the Napoli shirt, he wasn't a guest. He was salvation. He didn't land in a football club. He landed in a fever dream. When Diego Armando Maradona arrived in Naples on July 5, 1984, it wasn't a transfer. It was a revolution. Not planned, not organized, but felt. It hummed through the streets like electricity before a storm. Napoli had signed him, the most expensive player in the world, the Argentine wizard, the exile from Spain. And Naples, in all its beauty and chaos, was ready to explode. The airport was packed, hundreds deep. Flares lit the sky red. Women wept. Men climbed fences. Children shouted his name like it was a prayer. The car that picked him up was dented from the crowd. It crawled through a sea of bodies toward the city like a holy relic being carried home. And when he finally stepped into the Stadio San Paolo, not for a match, just a greeting, 70,000 people stood waiting, not watching, waiting, as if he could already deliver them from something, even before touching a ball. He walked out in jeans and a loose white shirt, waved, smiled, said a few words into the microphone, though no one heard them over the roar. Napoli had lived in the shadows of the North for decades, mocked, ignored, dismissed. Milan and Turin took the money, the trophies, the headlines. Naples got the leftovers and the insults. "Welcome to the third world," one headline said when he signed. They meant it as a joke. Naples took it as prophecy. And now they had him. The boy from Villa Fiorito who had stared down hunger and danced with dirt was theirs. The South had found its hero. It wasn't a perfect match. It was a collision. Naples wasn't like Barcelona. It wasn't polished. It wasn't orderly. It pulsed. It sweated. It overflowed. Vespas screamed through alleys. Churches leaned into traffic. Trash piled on corners. And under it all, something ancient. The city sat on a volcano, after all. The ground itself felt unstable, like it could erupt any second. Just like him. And Diego? He didn't just play in Naples. He became Naples. He rented a modest home at first, tried to stay quiet. But there was no quiet. Not here. Fans camped outside his building. Children waited outside restaurants for a glimpse. Women threw flowers from balconies. Priests asked him to bless newborns. Graffiti bloomed across walls. "Diego, save us." D10S. Our only hope. He hadn't played a game yet, but they didn't care, because it wasn't just about football. It was about revenge, about standing tall against the North, about pride. Maradona wasn't a player. He was a mirror. reflecting back to Naples all the beauty and anger they already carried inside. The local media fawned over him, then swarmed him. Every move, every meal, every shadow was a story. The club tried to protect him, but the city was too porous. Everyone knew someone who saw Diego. And Diego, at least at first, embraced it. He smiled. He waved. He danced with the madness. He understood it. He'd seen it before, in Buenos Aires, in Barcelona. But here, it felt different. It felt earned. And then the season began. Serie A wasn't soft. It was brutal. Defenders didn't tackle. They hunted. The tactics were tight, the spaces narrow, the fouls cynical. But Diego didn't flinch. He twisted through bodies, slipped past lunges, took hits, got up, kept going. His first goal came early. A curling free kick that dipped just enough to kiss the net. The crowd erupted like thunder over water. That sound, wild, full of faith and disbelief, became a ritual. Napoli didn't win much that year, not yet. But they won something deeper. Identity. With Diego on the field, they played like they mattered. Like the world finally had to watch. And they did. Journalists from across Europe flew in just to see him train. Opposing fans booed him because they feared him. Children copied his moves on cracked sidewalks. Older fans spoke his name in whispers, like legend was becoming fact. He wasn't perfect. The pressure weighed. He started disappearing into the night. Not recklessly, but searching. He found Naples both too big and too small. The adoration gave him power, but also paranoia. He couldn't eat in peace. Couldn't breathe without a headline. His circle tightened. He leaned on the wrong friends. He laughed louder, partied harder, slept less. And yet, every Sunday he delivered. He scored goals from angles that didn't exist, chipped keepers from 30 yards, bent physics with the outside of his left foot, and sometimes he didn't score at all. But he did something better. He made other players shine. He drew defenders like gravity, then released teammates into light. He made Napoli believe. There's a moment from a winter match, late in the season. The rain was pouring, the pitch a swamp. Players slipped, cursed, gave up. But Diego, soaked to the bone, hair matted, shirt clinging to him like a second skin, dribbled through 5 defenders, toe-poked the ball wide, and grinned. Not because he scored. He didn't. But because in that instant, he reminded everyone. Joy was still possible. And that was the point. He didn't come to Naples to win titles. Not yet. He came to ignite something, to step into a city's ache and make it sing. At the end of his first season, Napoli finished 8th. Not glorious, but the fans didn't care. They painted his name on every wall, sang his name in every square. He walked the streets like a saint in exile. Restaurants named dishes after him. Children begged to wear number 10. And Diego, for all his flaws, his fire, his rising darkness, gave them everything. Not perfectly, but fully. Because Naples didn't want perfect. Naples wanted someone who understood what it meant to be broken. And still keep dancing. In Naples, he was no longer just a footballer. He was a god, the kind that walked among chaos, smoke, and song. The South had found its savior, and every pass, every goal, every glare toward the North fed the legend. Diego wasn't just winning games. He was rewriting power, pride, and the very soul of a city. They say gods live in the sky, in temples, in myths passed down from marble columns and golden scrolls. But in Naples, the people made a different choice. They chose their god from the dirt, from the alleys, from the chaos. And they didn't ask him to be holy, just to be theirs. By the summer of 1986, Diego Armando Maradona wasn't just a footballer anymore. He had become a symbol of rebellion, of pride, of South against North, of everything Naples had long been denied. And now, with each passing Sunday, he was turning that belief into something tangible. Not just hope, not just magic, but victories. Napoli didn't have a glorious past. Before Diego, they were a club of heartbreaks and mid-table obscurity. Talented, yes. Passionate beyond measure. But always second tier in the grand architecture of Italian football. Milan had the glamour. Juventus had the trophies. Inter had the money. And Naples? Naples had yearning. Until now. Because Diego didn't just come to play, he came to conquer. To write a chapter no one else dared dream. And slowly, he dragged the club and the city into a new era. His second season began with an edge. There was a sharpness to his game, a hunger in his eyes. He scored with his left, his right, his head, his heart. He turned defenders into furniture, goalkeepers into spectators. And teammates? He made them giants, not because they were the best, but because he made them believe they were. There's a pass from that season, a memory now, etched into the minds of Neapolitans like scripture. A chipped ball, just behind the back line, no backlift, no warning. It floated like a prayer and landed at the foot of an onrushing striker who hadn't even started his run. Goal. The kind of pass that makes you look at your friend and whisper, "Did you see that?" But Diego wasn't chasing highlights. He was building something heavier. He began to speak like a captain, to fight for teammates, to argue with referees not for ego, but for justice. He didn't just represent Napoli, he protected it. The city responded like a body to a heartbeat. Shops painted murals of his face. Children skipped school to watch training. Churches held up signs that said, "Maradona is more than a saint. He's left-footed." When he touched the ball, stadiums leaned forward. When he scored, people cried. And in the 1986 to 87 season, it all came together. Napoli started strong. Wins piled up, then more and more. But no one wanted to say it out loud, not yet. Because to dream too loudly in Naples was to invite disappointment. So they watched, waited, prayed, and Diego kept delivering. Away to Milan. Goal. Home against Juventus. Assistant against Roma. A free kick that bent around the wall like it had a soul of its own. He wasn't just outplaying opponents. He was bending the entire league to his rhythm. And around him, Napoli began to rise. Midfielders ran harder. Defenders tackled with teeth. The goalkeeper, long criticized, suddenly looked invincible. It wasn't magic. It was belief. And it was contagious. And then came the final stretch. May 10th, 1987. Naples held its breath. One win away. One match to rewrite history. Napoli versus Fiorentina. The San Paolo filled like never before. Overflowing, shaking, singing. The match wasn't beautiful. It was nervous, tight, both sides desperate. The minutes dragged like hours. And then, a corner, a scramble. The ball fell to Diego. One touch, another. A pass, a goal. Not his, but born from him. The crowd erupted. Not just with joy, but with release. Years of frustration poured out in song, in tears, in silence broken by screams. The whistle blew. Napoli were champions. For the first time in their history, they had won Serie A. And in the streets of Naples, time stopped. Strangers hugged. Fireworks turned the sky into a mural of light. Grandmothers kissed their rosaries and wept. Children danced barefoot in the fountains. The dead were even honored. Tombstones painted with the words, "You don't know what you missed." And at the center of it all was Diego. Not on a throne, not behind velvet ropes, but in the thick of the crowd, shirtless, sweating, singing, his face painted blue, his arms raised like a man calling down thunder. He wasn't separate from the people. He was of them, a god who bled, who swore, who rose. The next day, the newspapers ran one headline above all others: Maradona is Naples. It wasn't just poetry, it was fact. He had given the city more than a title. He had given it identity, pride, proof. For one glorious season, and more to come, Naples stood above the giants of the north, not because they bought their way there, but because they danced there, because Diego took them. In the months that followed, the myth only deepened. The murals grew bigger, the chants louder. Churches lit candles not just for saints, but for number 10. And Diego? He smiled through it all, sometimes shyly, sometimes wickedly, always with that look, like he knew something the rest of us didn't. He wasn't perfect. He was beginning to carry shadows. Fame had teeth, pressure built. But for now, Naples didn't care. They had their title, their icon, their impossible, unstoppable, irreplaceable Diego. And in that summer sun, with confetti still floating through alleyways and banners fluttering from balconies, one thing became clear. He hadn't just won a league. He had changed the meaning of what a man could be, especially when the world told him he shouldn't, especially when the world didn't want him to. And for Naples, that was the greatest miracle of all. Argentina held its breath. The nation was bruised by war, by poverty, by politics. But in the silence between storms, they turned to football. And all eyes, once again, found Diego. Mexico 1986 wasn't just a tournament. It was a crossroads, a chance to believe in something, or someone. The call came not with trumpets, but with tension. After all the glory in Naples, after the chaos of Barcelona, after years of brilliance and bruises, Diego Armando Maradona was once again the face of Argentina's national team. It wasn't a surprise. It was an inevitability. But that didn't mean everyone was ready. The nation was fractured, not just politically, though the scars of the junta still bled quietly, but emotionally. Football had always been Argentina's heartbeat, but in 1986, it throbbed with anxiety. The wounds from Spain '82 hadn't healed. That tournament had promised so much, then delivered humiliation. And Diego, suspended, frustrated, expelled, had carried much of the blame. He was a genius, yes, but also a risk. Carlos Bilardo, the national coach, knew this better than anyone. A man of strategy, systems, obsession. He wasn't there to play beautiful football. He was there to win. And with Maradona, he saw both salvation and fire, a force too powerful to ignore and too dangerous to mishandle. Their relationship was strange, not warm, not cold, tactical. Bilardo studied Maradona like a chess piece, not to contain him, but to unleash him. And Maradona? He didn't always like Bilardo, but he respected him. The coach gave him space, gave him freedom, gave him the armband. And with that, everything changed. Captain. It sounded absurd at first. Diego? The captain of a national team? The boy who danced past defenders and curfews alike? But Bilardo saw what others didn't. Beneath the tattoos and tantrums, there was steel. Maradona didn't just inspire. He commanded. When he spoke, teammates listened. When he stared, they followed. He wasn't polished. He was real, and that was enough. Training camp began months before Mexico. Out in the quiet fields of Ezeiza, away from the noise of Buenos Aires, the team began to form. Slowly, uneasily, the press circled like wolves. Every lineup was questioned, every decision dissected, and always, always the same question. Can Maradona lead? He trained like a man possessed. While others jogged, he sprinted. While others stretched, He juggled balls until his legs ached. He arrived early, stayed late, barked at teammates, laughed with ball boys. One day, a young reserve missed a tackle in practice. Diego stopped play, walked over, put a hand on the kid's shoulder and whispered something. No one knows what he said. But from that day, the kid ran harder, tackled sharper, believed. And belief, that was the fuel. The team wasn't perfect. It had cracks. Some veterans were slow. Some stars refused to pass. The defense was brittle, the midfield uneven. But around Maradona, things began to cohere. His energy filled the gaps. He wasn't just creating goals, he was creating glue. Off the pitch, it wasn't so smooth. The media never let up. Old guard pundits said he was too volatile, too emotional, too Neapolitan. He spoke with his hands, lived with his heart, and didn't care for suits or protocol. Reporters waited outside his hotel. Paparazzi trailed his car. One tabloid ran a daily column titled The Maradona Watch, tracking his meals, his movements, even his moods. He laughed it off. Mostly. But inside he felt the weight. Because this wasn't Napoli. This was Argentina, his homeland, his mother's prayers, his father's silence, his childhood dreams, and somewhere deep inside, that poor boy from Villa Fiorito still wanted to prove he was worthy. As the weeks passed, the pressure grew. The Argentine Football Association wasn't exactly stable. Money was tight. Politics were poisonous. Some board members tried to undermine Bilardo. Others tried to replace him altogether. But the coach stood firm, and behind him, so did Diego. Their alliance was strange, but solid. Bilardo kept the team isolated. No interviews, no distractions, just drills, repetitions, heat training, altitude sessions, and endless tactical meetings. Diego, who once rolled his eyes at strategy boards, now leaned in. He asked questions, argued, offered ideas, not to undermine, but to understand. He wanted more than freedom. He wanted to lead. In one closed-door meeting, Bilardo laid out the core principle of their World Cup plan. We don't need 11 stars. We need one sun and 10 planets that revolve around it. He looked at Maradona. No one needed to speak. The message was clear. And then came the friendlies. Test matches meant to iron out formations, test chemistry, calm nerves. Against Norway, Diego was quiet. Against Israel, he dazzled. Against Yugoslavia, he limped off with a knock. And the country gasped in unison. The injury was minor, but the reaction wasn't. Argentina had bet everything on him. There was no plan B. As the final squad was announced, more controversy. Some stars were dropped, some unknowns were chosen. Critics screamed, commentators scoffed, but Maradona stood by Bilardo. "Trust him," he said in a rare press appearance. "He knows what he's doing." The nation wasn't convinced, but it wanted to be. From the barrios of La Boca to the cafes of Recoleta, people argued. Would he shine or shatter? Would he carry or collapse? Every taxi driver had a theory. Every grandmother lit a candle. Murals began to reappear. His face, his curls, his left foot framed by halos or painted in war paint. Not everyone loved him, but everyone knew. If Argentina were to rise again, it would be through him. And so they waited, not just for goals, but for redemption. The heat was relentless. The pressure, even more. In Mexico, altitude drained lungs and expectation weighed on every step. But Diego? He thrived in it. Each match became a stage, each touch a statement. This wasn't just a comeback. It was an awakening. The world was watching, and he was ready to rise. Mexico greeted them not with flowers, but with fire. The heat hit like a wall the moment the plane door opened. Not just warm, oppressive, heavy, alive. The kind of heat that crawled into your lungs and made your heartbeat feel louder. The kind of heat that melted plans and punished arrogance. And into that furnace, Argentina stepped, uncertain, unproven, and carrying the full weight of a nation's expectation on one man's shoulders. Maradona walked down the steps first. Not because he wanted to, because everyone expected him to. The airport was crowded. Reporters from every continent, microphones like bayonets. Questions shouted in Spanish, Italian, English. Are you ready? Can you lead? Will you choke again? He smiled, shrugged, said something vague. But inside, he burned hotter than the sun. The team settled in Toluca, a town just west of Mexico City, high in altitude and thin in air. Training became a brutal routine. Mornings filled with sprints that left lungs gasping. Afternoons spent juggling tactics under a sun that turned grass to ash. Every session ended with bodies sprawled on the ground, sweating, coughing, surviving. Bilardo was relentless. He knew Argentina didn't have the deepest squad, or the tallest, or the most consistent. But he believed in structure, in geometry, in maximizing the chaos Maradona could create. He drilled his players like clockwork, every movement rehearsed, every fallback practiced. They called it a prison. He called it preparation. Maradona didn't complain. He led. And when the World Cup finally began, everything felt sharper. The lights, the songs, the nerves. It was as if the world had been holding its breath for 4 years, waiting to see if Argentina could rise again, waiting to see if Maradona could rise at all. Their first match was against South Korea, a team fast, brave, and unknown. The stadium buzzed with noise but no rhythm, and in the middle of it all, Maradona danced. He didn't score, but he made everything happen. He assisted, drew fouls, opened space. He played like a man unburdened, like the ghost of Spain '82 had finally stopped following him. Argentina won 3-1. The press relaxed. The headlines shifted. Maradona commands. Captain in control. But the real test was yet to come. Next, Italy. Reigning world champions. Experienced, disciplined, clinical. And a team that knew Diego better than most. Many of their defenders had kicked him weakly in Serie A. They knew his turns, his tricks, his rhythm. They had studied him like a predator studies prey. And for 45 minutes, it worked. Italy scored first. A quiet panic began to spread through Argentine hearts. But then, a spark. A pass rolled loose. Diego pounced. One step, then another. Then a shimmy that broke ankles and angles alike. A left-footed strike, quick, low, precise, that curled inside the post. The net rippled. The world paused. He didn't scream. He didn't run. He turned calmly and jogged back to midfield. As if to say, I told you so. The match ended 1-1. Not a win, but a message. The final group match was against Bulgaria. Hot, flat, scrappy. Argentina needed a result to top the group, and Maradona, again, delivered. An assist so delicate it looked accidental. A pass with eyes. A dribble that sent 3 defenders into orbit. Argentina won 2-0. Group winners. Into the knockout stage. And yet, something strange lingered. Maradona was playing beautifully. Not perfectly, but with intent, control, vision. And yet, the atmosphere around the team remained cautious. The Argentine press, never easily satisfied, warned of defensive lapses. Critics mumbled about over-reliance on number 10. Bilardo's tactics were called ugly, conservative, even cowardly. But Maradona didn't flinch. He shielded his teammates from the noise, took the hard questions, spoke calmly, firmly. We're a team, he said. We win together. We fall together. Behind closed doors, he was even more direct. He challenged veterans who slacked, encouraged kids who doubted, demanded effort. Not through shouting, but through presence. When Diego trained hard, no one dared take it easy. When he showed up focused, the others followed. And so the team grew, not in headlines, but in belief. Because belief in a tournament like this is everything. Tactics matter. Talent matters. But belief is what lets you run when your legs scream stop. Belief is what lets you try the impossible, and then pull it off. And Maradona believed, not just in himself, but in fate. Because somewhere, deep inside, he sensed it. That something was building, that this wasn't just a tournament, it was a reckoning, a storm gathering shape, a script being written in heat and silence. Mexico didn't just host the World Cup, Mexico whispered to it. And Maradona, for the first time in his life, listened. One match changed everything. England, history, revenge. In 90 minutes, Diego became both sinner and saint. First, the hand, brazen, defiant, impossible. Then the run, glorious, untouched, divine. It wasn't just a goal. It was poetry and provocation all at once. And in that moment, he wore both the halo and the crown. It was never just a football match. Not on that day. Not between those two nations. Not under that sun. When Argentina faced England in the quarterfinals of the 1986 World Cup, the ball might have been round, but the emotions were jagged. The war was over, technically. The Falklands conflict had ended 4 years earlier, but the pain hadn't. Not in Buenos Aires, where mothers still wept. Not in London, where politicians still smirked. And certainly not in the hearts of young Argentines who had grown up with death notices and pride in conflict. For them, this wasn't a game. It was payback. But Maradona didn't speak of revenge, not publicly. He talked about football, about focus, about tactics. But inside, the fire raged. He'd seen what war did. The broken families, the fear in his parents' eyes. He knew what this match meant, even if he refused to say it. And as kickoff approached, he felt the weight of a country on his shoulders. The Estadio Azteca shimmered with tension. Hundreds of journalists, tens of thousands of fans. Flags waved, drums pounded, sweat dripped from every surface. The air was thick with something more than heat. It was history waiting to happen. The first half was tight, nervous. England played cautiously, sitting deep, waiting for mistakes. Argentina pressed but couldn't find space. Tackles flew, tempers flared. The referee blew for halftime, and the world exhaled. Briefly. Then came the second half. And with it, legend. It started in the 51st minute. A harmless clearance, bouncing awkwardly, reached Diego near the top of the English box. He flicked it forward to Jorge Valdano, who lost control, and the ball popped into the air. Suddenly, it was just Maradona, England keeper Peter Shilton, and the sky. Shilton, taller, stronger, flew in with fists raised. Diego didn't jump, he launched. His left hand, subtle and fast, struck the ball before his head ever did. It floated past the keeper and into the net. Silence. Then an explosion. The referee pointed to the center circle. Goal. The English players screamed, waved their arms, surrounded the official. But he hadn't seen the hand. The linesman hadn't either. And Maradona? He ran away, arms outstretched, face blank, like a man not celebrating, but daring the world to stop him. He would later call it a little with the head of Maradona and a little with the hand of God. The world howled. But 4 minutes later, it was quiet. Because Diego did something no one had ever seen before, and maybe never will again. He picked up the ball near midfield, turned, and ran. One English defender came. He skipped past, then another, then another, then two more. The goalkeeper lunged. Diego jinked, slid the ball into the net with a touch so gentle it looked like kindness. From inside his own half. 11 seconds. 5 men beaten. The goal of the century. The stadium didn't erupt. It melted. Even some English fans applauded, not because it didn't hurt, but because it was undeniable. Pure, perfect, divine. Argentina led 2-0. The rest of the match faded into noise. England pulled one back, made it tense, but it never truly felt like they could catch him. Catch them. When the final whistle blew, Diego didn't raise his arms in victory. He collapsed to his knees, exhausted, overwhelmed, redeemed. In the locker room, the players cheered, sang, poured water on each other. Diego sat in the corner. He wasn't smiling. When someone asked about the handball, he shrugged. "If I could apologize and keep the goal," he said later, "I would." But that's not how football works. Back home, Argentina didn't care. The papers ran the headline, Venganza, revenge. But others called it heresy, cheating, disgraceful. The world split in two. Half saw a villain, half saw a god. And Diego? He didn't try to explain. Because how could he? One moment was stolen, the other sublime. One tricked the rules, the other rewrote them. And between the two, in that strange space between sin and sanctity, the legend of Maradona became something more than football. It became myth. 2 games remained, just 2. But the weight of a nation, of history, of myth, it grew heavier with every step. First, Belgium fell. Then came West Germany, ruthless, disciplined, relentless. But Diego didn't flinch. He didn't need to score. He only needed to guide. And as the final whistle echoed through the Azteca, Argentina had risen with him. By the time they reached the semi-final, Maradona's legs no longer felt like his own. He moved by memory now, not muscle. The altitude had drained him. The heat had carved into him. But he kept going, because what else could he do? He had pulled Argentina this far, and now the peak was within reach. They would face Belgium, not Brazil, not Germany. Belgium. And that made it even more dangerous. Because Belgium had no expectations, no weight, no ghosts. They had just stunned the world by eliminating Spain and the Soviet Union. They weren't brilliant, but they were bold. And they had one goal. Stop number 10. In the tunnel before kickoff, Diego stood still. He closed his eyes. Not to pray, not to listen, just to breathe. A young ball boy tugged at his sleeve. "Señor Diego, vas a ganar?" Maradona looked down. The boy couldn't have been more than 8. Wide eyes, nervous smile. Diego knelt. "If I score 2, will you believe I'm magic?" The boy grinned. And then, magic happened. Just before the hour mark, the ball fell to Maradona outside the box. He didn't hesitate. One touch forward, then he exploded through 2 defenders. A stumble, a shoulder, a slip. And then the ball was in the net. Left foot, low, defiant. 1-0. Minutes later, he struck again. This time, a perfect pass from Enrique sliced the defense open. Maradona darted through like a spark in dry grass. A single touch took him around the keeper, and with a gentle flick, he buried the second. 2-0. Belgium folded, Argentina soared, and Mexico City once again bowed to the boy from Villa Fiorito. But that night, back at the hotel, he didn't celebrate. He sat alone in his room, lights off, eyes on the ceiling. The walls hummed with quiet. Teammates laughing in distant rooms, televisions murmuring in Spanish. But inside Diego, there was only silence. He thought about his legs, about Sunday, about West Germany. He thought about his mother. And then he slept, curled like a child. The final felt more like a war than a match. West Germany were machines, organized, relentless, cold. They played like a team with a purpose, a plan, a history of winning. Argentina, by contrast, were exhausted, spent. Maradona had carried them with brilliance, yes, but also by sheer will. And now that will was fraying. The stadium was packed with 114,000 people, each one shouting a different kind of prayer. Reporters called it the most anticipated final in decades. But for Maradona, it was something simpler. It was the last mountain. The opening minutes were tense. Argentina struck first. A flicked goal by José Luis Brown, the defender who had once been told he'd never play again. 1-0. The bench erupted. In the second half, Jorge Valdano made it 2-0. A perfect breakaway, composed finish. It looked like destiny. But the Germans don't believe in destiny. They believe in repetition. They pushed forward, relentlessly. They won corners, free kicks, inches. And then they scored. 2-1. Then again, 2-2. Like that, in the span of 6 minutes, Argentina's dream teetered on collapse. Maradona stood in midfield, hands on hips, chest heaving. The camera caught his face, pale, still, unreadable. Not angry, not panicked. Just calm. Then came the moment. Minute 84. Maradona received the ball near the center circle. 2 Germans lunged. He spun away. Another stepped forward. Diego slipped through. And then, with a touch so perfect it could only be felt, not seen, he threaded a pass through 2 defenders into the path of Jorge Burruchaga. Burruchaga ran like it was the last sprint of his life. Ran with the weight of a country behind him. The keeper came out. Burruchaga poked it past. 3-2. The net bulged, and Diego collapsed to the grass, not in celebration, but in release. 5 minutes later, it was over. Argentina were world champions. The bench stormed the field. Some players cried, some prayed, some kissed the grass. And Diego? He was buried in a mountain of bodies. Teammates, coaches, staff, everyone clinging to him like he was both man and miracle. He had done it. He had taken them all the way. Up the mountain, through the fire, past the doubters. He didn't score in the final, but he didn't need to. Because when the world looked at that gold trophy, they didn't see the goal scorers. They saw the man who made it all possible. As he lifted the cup above his head, the world exploded around him. Camera flashes, roaring fans, fireworks from the sky. And for one fragile second, as the confetti fell and the anthem played, Diego Armando Maradona stood alone at the top of football. And the boy from the mud, the boy who once played with a stuffed sock in a slum, had conquered the world. He returned to Naples as more than a champion. He was a conqueror of continents. In Argentina, he was a god. In Naples, a king. But worship came with a cost. The crowds grew louder, the lines blurred, glory and madness began to dance, and somewhere between north and south, fame and fear. Diego started to drift. The morning after the final, Maradona couldn't move. Not from pain, not from exhaustion, but from something else. A weight that had settled deep inside him. He lay in his hotel bed, the curtains drawn, the sunlight creeping in like an unwelcome guest. His voice was hoarse, his eyes puffy, and beside him on the nightstand sat a half-empty glass of water and the gold medal he had worn all night, even while he slept. A knock at the door. "Diego, the cameras are downstairs." He didn't answer. They could wait. The world could wait. He had won everything, everything. The World Cup, the streets, the hearts of his people. He was no longer just a player. He was a symbol, a saint, a weapon against memory. Every child in Buenos Aires wanted to be him. Every adult saw their dreams inside him. But symbols don't get to rest. When he returned to Argentina, the airport had to shut down. There were too many people. Not just fans, families, old women, children on shoulders, babies wrapped in sky blue. They chanted his name like it was a hymn. They threw flowers. Some cried. On the drive into the city, a man in a suit broke through a police line, slammed both hands on the windshield of Diego's car and shouted, "You saved us!" And maybe he had. In the capital, the government threw parades. Newspapers printed full-page images of him holding the trophy, photoshopped with sunbeams behind his head. Churches held unofficial masses in his honor. One magazine ran the headline, "Maradona is not a man, he is a country." He didn't sleep for 3 days. He gave interviews, shook hands, accepted medals. He kissed the president on the cheek. He hugged priests. He danced on balconies. And at every step, the world closed in tighter. One night, finally alone in a hotel suite with blackout curtains and silence, he stood shirtless before a mirror. The gold medal hung heavy around his neck. He stared at himself for a long time. The curls, the eyes, the tired chest rising and falling. And he whispered, not to himself, but to something larger. "I did it." But even then, he didn't smile, because he knew what came next. The world would not let go. Back in Naples, the city greeted him like Caesar returning from conquest. Napoli's streets were soaked in blue smoke and opera. Murals appeared overnight. Diego with wings, Diego with the Pope, Diego with a halo. Local bakeries sold Maradona pastries shaped like his boots. One restaurant changed its name to Pibe de Oro. The mayor declared a citywide holiday. And everywhere he went, people touched him, not for autographs, but for blessing. But even paradise has shadows. With fame came fear. Security was tightened. Friends became handlers. Reporters camped outside his home. Mafia figures started appearing at his parties, offering protection, connections, favors he hadn't asked for. And when he politely declined, they smiled, and stayed anyway. On the field, he was still a god. Napoli crushed opponents. Every time he touched the ball, the stadium seemed to inhale. The defenders doubled up. Goalkeepers leaned early. But he danced between them as if gravity only applied to others. And yet, the cheers now carried something else. Expectation. Worship, yes, but also hunger. He wasn't just playing football anymore. He was maintaining a miracle. In one late-night interview, a soft-spoken Italian journalist asked, "Diego, what do you fear most now that you've conquered the world?" Maradona didn't hesitate. "That I'll stop being me." The silence that followed wasn't edited. It lingered. The cameras kept rolling. And for a moment, the boy from Villa Fiorito looked like a man trying to remember where he had come from and whether it still existed. Later that week, after a match he won with a 30-meter free kick, he sat in the locker room alone. A teammate tried to joke, "Come on, king of the world, let's celebrate." But Diego didn't laugh. He just looked up and said quietly, "I miss the mud." By the end of that year, Maradona had become something no athlete had ever been. A bridge between two universes. In Europe, he was a genius in cleats, a marketing dream, a rebel with godlike balance. In Argentina, he was more. A myth, a mirror, a moment in time when the impossible had happened. And in both places, people wanted more. More goals, more magic, more Diego. But even gods have limits. Even kings grow tired. And deep down, beneath the applause and the confetti and the golden cups, Diego Armando Maradona was beginning to understand something that no victory could erase. Being everything to everyone means slowly becoming nothing to yourself. The cracks became canyons. The nights grew longer. The whispers turned to headlines. Behind the brilliance was a man unraveling, pulled by addiction, surrounded by shadows, protected by silence. Cocaine wasn't just an escape. It was a cage. And as the crowd still chanted his name, Diego was slipping through the noise and into the dark. It didn't start with a scandal. It started with a whisper. A moment in a nightclub when someone offered a little white line. A friend. A promise of energy. A laugh. "It's nothing," they said. "Just for fun." And Diego, tired, famous, invincible, said yes. Not because he needed it, because he was too tired to say no. By the late 80s, Naples had become a paradox. Outside, he was a king. Inside, he was a prisoner. The phone never stopped ringing. Strangers showed up at his gate. His face was on candles, t-shirts, murals, coins. He couldn't walk through a grocery store, couldn't go to dinner, couldn't take his daughter to the park without a mob. So he stopped trying. He partied at night, hid during the day, and trained just enough to stay dangerous. In one match against Juventus, he scored from an angle that no physicist could explain. He curled the ball around two defenders, off balance, off rhythm, into the top corner. The stadium went mad. But that night, after the match, in the back room of a nightclub, he sat on a red leather couch and stared at the ceiling for an hour. He didn't speak, didn't move, just breathed. A girl sat next to him and asked, "Are you okay?" He smiled, a tiny, tired smile, and said, "I'm just somewhere else." The cocaine was never about the high. It was about silence. It was the only thing that made the noise stop. The cameras, the headlines, the hopes. It quieted the ghosts. It let him forget the weight of Argentina, the pressure of Napoli, the guilt of not always being the god they wanted him to be. But nothing stays silent for long. In early 1991, a routine drug test came back positive. The Federation acted fast. They had to. UEFA was watching, Italy was watching, Argentina was watching. He was banned. 15 months. No appeals. No leniency. No Diego. The day the news broke, he left the stadium without speaking. Cameras chased him. A reporter shouted, "Diego, is it true?" He didn't answer. He kept walking. And walking. Until he reached the sea. There, under the fading Neapolitan sun, he took off his shoes, stepped into the water, and whispered something only the ocean heard. The fall wasn't sudden. It was slow, clumsy, sad, the kind that doesn't break bones. It bruises the soul. He stayed in Naples a little while longer, but the city had changed. Or maybe he had. The same people who once painted his face on walls now crossed the street. Friends stopped calling. Strangers became judges. Reporters became executioners. One night, a knock at the door. Police, drug raid. They claimed they were looking for traffickers, but the cameras were already outside before they arrived. He wasn't arrested, not that night, but the image of Diego, barefoot, half asleep, shielding his daughter from the flashing lights, was enough. The myth cracked. The world watched. And the fall began. In Argentina, people wept, not because he had used drugs, because he had been caught, because the man they believed was untouchable had become just like them, human, flawed, vulnerable. And that was the cruelest cut of all. In a Buenos Aires cafe, an old man reading the paper whispered to no one, "They finally got him." In Villa Fiorito, a mural was painted over, but not completely. Just enough to blur the eyes. Yet even then, in the haze of scandal, punishment, shame, there was still beauty. One evening at a dusty field in Rosario, a group of kids played barefoot, kicking a balled-up sock between them. No goals, no lines, just joy. One of them, maybe 7, stopped to catch his breath and looked up. "Someday I'll be like Maradona," he said. And the others nodded, because even in ruin, even in exile, Diego was still more than his sins. He was a dream, a flicker, a legend told in alleyways and schoolyards, a warning and a wonder. And though the king had fallen, the story somehow kept rising. They pushed him out, but his shadow never left. Suspended, hunted, shamed, Diego vanished from the pitch, but not from memory. In every stadium, in every whisper, he was still there, waiting, burning. And even in exile, the echoes of his genius refused to fade. When the gates of Naples closed behind him, there was no ceremony, no speech, no tearful farewell. Just the sharp click of a door locking, and the faint echo of a city turning its back on a man it had once called a god. Diego walked out alone, and the silence was louder than any stadium he'd ever played in. The ban lasted 15 months. Not a year. 15 full months. As if someone had chosen that number to make it sting. Not long enough to forget, not short enough to forgive. He spent the first weeks in Argentina, hiding from the press, from the mirror, from himself. Some days he wouldn't get out of bed. Others, he'd walk the streets at dawn, unnoticed, unshaved, drifting like a man without a country. There was a little boy once, maybe 6 years old, who passed him on the corner of San Martin and didn't even look up. Diego watched him go and whispered, "That used to be me." But time is strange. It forgets quickly, yet forgives slowly. After the ban, there were whispers again. Of a comeback, a return. Not to Naples, that chapter was closed. But somewhere, anywhere. He tried Sevilla. It was warm, familiar, Spanish. The coach welcomed him like an old friend, and for a moment, it felt like football again. He trained hard, sweated in the heat, talked less, ran more. And when the crowd saw him score that first volley, soft touch, rise, strike, they remembered. But the body wasn't the same. The lungs burned faster. The legs betrayed him sooner. After just 26 games, the dream cracked again. Too slow, they said. Too old. Too late. So he tried Newell's old boys. Back in Argentina, back on home soil. He wore the jersey like a second skin. The stands erupted when he jogged out. Old men cried. Young kids painted his number on their chests. But something wasn't right. He limped through training, argued with doctors, stopped showing up. One match, he stared at the ball before kickoff for a full 10 seconds. Then turned to the ref and asked, "Do you believe in ghosts?" The ref didn't answer. He never played for Newell's again. USA. The call came from the national team, not from love, from need. Argentina needed him. Or rather, they needed what he represented: fear, respect, belief. He accepted. He trained harder than he had in years. Cut weight, quit cigarettes, talked with God, even shaved. And for 2 matches, he was back. Sharp, precise, angry. He scored against Greece, ran to the camera, eyes wild, veins screaming. It was pure theater, and the world believed the myth again. Until the test came, and failed him. Positive. Not cocaine, not heroin, ephedrine, a stimulant, a mistake, a scandal. He was expelled from the tournament. Argentina collapsed without him. And Diego, once again, was alone. Back to the silence. Back to the exile. In the years that followed, he drifted. Clubs came and went. Offers arrived, then vanished. Interviews turned bitter. He ballooned in weight, then vanished to clinics. Once, in Cuba, he stayed silent for 47 days. Not a word. In Buenos Aires, tabloids ran weekly stories about his health, his fights, his tears. He became both punchline and prayer, a broken hero. And yet, he remained visible. People still called his name on the street, still wrote D10S on walls, still bought jerseys with his number even if he hadn't worn one in years. He was no longer a footballer. He was something stranger, an echo, a myth still breathing. In one interview, a journalist asked, "Are you still exiled, Diego?" He smiled softly. "Exile isn't a place," he said. "It's when your body keeps moving but your soul stays behind." And then he laughed. Because even in the wreckage, even in the weight of all that had gone wrong, he still had that. The laugh, the spark, the echo, and it hadn't died yet. On November 25th, 2020, the world went quiet. No whistle blew, no chant rose. But something shifted. A boy had become a man, the man had become a legend, and the legend had become eternal. He was no longer number 10, no longer the magician at the center circle, no longer the man with the low socks, the thick thighs, the fire in his veins. The roar of the crowd no longer followed him. The ball no longer obeyed him. But somehow, Diego Armando Maradona had not disappeared. He had only changed shape. He had become something else entirely. A rumor, a headline, a myth still walking. Not on grass, but through airports, clinics, press rooms, and memories. And wherever he went, the world followed. Not because it understood him, but because it couldn't stop looking. He tried to live a quiet life after the final whistle, but quiet was never part of his vocabulary. Retirement didn't mean retreat. Not for him. It meant reinvention. Chaos wearing a suit, fire in slow motion. His first step was to stay close to the game, to feel the scent of the pitch again. Not as a player, but as a coach. Mandiu de Corrientes was the first club to welcome him. A small team in a forgotten corner of Argentina, and Maradona arrived as if returning to a lost province of his kingdom. He barked orders, paced the sidelines, wore oversized jackets and sunglasses indoors. He talked about tactics as if they were magic tricks, and when his players failed to deliver, he'd tear his own notes in half like a betrayed poet. Then came Racing Club. Bigger expectations, same result. He couldn't translate instinct into instruction, couldn't slow the game down enough to explain it. What had once lived in his feet now floated above his reach. "How can I teach them something I never learned to explain?" he said once, quietly, to a friend after a loss. "I played with my soul, and they want diagrams." But he kept trying. In the years that followed, the public saw him everywhere and nowhere. His image split across television screens, newspapers, graffiti. He went to Cuba to fight addiction. He stayed for years. Said he found peace there. Said the palm trees reminded him of Fiorito. Said Castro was a brother. Said a lot of things. Sometimes to cameras, sometimes to himself. He gained weight, lost weight, disappeared, reappeared, always with new headlines. Maradona collapses in hotel room. Maradona fights journalist. Maradona meets Chavez. Maradona gets tattoo of Che Guevara. His life had become a carousel of contradictions. He cursed the media, then called reporters late at night to vent. He spoke of politics like a veteran, with fury and poetry and no filter. He criticized George W. Bush, praised Fidel, hugged Evo Morales, screamed against FIFA corruption, then showed up at their banquets. He was a man no one could fully follow, not even himself. And still, people loved him. Not the kind of love reserved for saints, but the stubborn love people have for fallen heroes who refuse to stay down. It was a national, chaotic, irrational love. Not despite his flaws, but because of them. At a Boca match in 2006, he showed up unannounced. He had just been released from a clinic, wore a leather jacket, sunglasses. He raised his hand to the crowd, and the entire stadium chanted his name until the final whistle. He stood for 10 minutes afterward, unmoving, eyes wet. "I thought they forgot me," he said. They never had. He tried family life too, or his version of it. He acknowledged some children, denied others, then embraced them all eventually. He cried on talk shows. He laughed in interviews. He once kissed his daughter on live TV and said, "She saved my life." Another time, he yelled at a reporter who questioned his parenting. "I'm not perfect," he shouted, "but I never ran from love." His daughters protected him from the worst of himself. Dalma and Giannina, soft voices in the chaos. When the world spun too fast, they steadied him. When doctors called, when papers screamed, when pain came, they were his shelter. And still, he drifted. Then, in 2008, Argentina came calling. Not as a player, not as a symbol, but as a coach. It made no sense. He hadn't succeeded at club level. His methods were erratic, his presence polarizing, but the people wanted it. The myth needed to return home. The Federation gave him the shirt, not out of strategy, but out of faith. And Diego accepted. He stood before cameras, hand on chest, and said, "For this jersey, I would die today." He coached with fire, screamed from the bench, prayed on the sidelines, hugged players like long-lost sons. He kissed the pitch before every match and stared at the sky as if speaking directly to his mother. He took Argentina to the World Cup in 2010. And though the journey ended in a heavy defeat to Germany, 4-0, no one could say he hadn't given himself completely. After the loss, he stood motionless in the rain. Reporters pushed mics toward him. He said nothing, just wiped his face and walked into the tunnel, alone as he had entered so many times before. In the years that followed, he kept coaching. In the United Arab Emirates, in Mexico, back in Argentina. Always with a cane now, sometimes needing help to walk, sometimes too medicated to speak clearly, but always present. In 2018, he took over Dorados de Sinaloa, a second-division Mexican club. Journalists called it sad, a sideshow. But the players didn't think so. To them, he was still a god. He gave speeches about heart, not strategy. Sat on a plastic chair during matches, pointing with his cane, muttering prayers. He hugged every goal scorer like a father seeing his son return from war. They reached the final that year. They lost, but no one cared. One player later said, "I didn't win a title. I lived a story." His health worsened. He underwent surgeries. His speech slurred. He moved in and out of clinics. He disappeared for stretches. There were days when friends couldn't reach him. Days when he wouldn't leave his room. Days when he couldn't recognize his reflection. But even in weakness, he burned. He called into radio shows to defend Messi. He sent voice notes to fans. He wrote letters from recovery beds. He wore Boca jerseys to the hospital. He kept watching every match, every replay, every little boy juggling a ball on dusty streets. And in 2019, when Gimnasia y Esgrima gave him a coaching job, he cried. Not because it was big, but because it meant they still believed. They carried him onto the field. Fans wept. He stood there in a tracksuit that didn't fit, a cap pulled low, arms raised, not like a king returning to his throne, but like a man who had finally come home. He wasn't the same, but he was still him. Battered, slower, quieter, but unmistakably Maradona. He would sit on the bench and whisper instructions, then suddenly rise, shout, and point to the heavens. He waved to fans who painted murals in his honor. He signed shirts for grandfathers and grandchildren alike. In one moment, he was fire. In the next, just a man who missed the sound of applause. At his last birthday, before everything changed, 60 years old, Boca Juniors honored him. He walked out to the field trembling, needed help to make it to the center circle. But the crowd still roared, chanted his name, held banners with his face. He looked around, dazed, raised his hand, and smiled. It was the smile of a man who knew that whatever came next, he had lived too much for one lifetime, and that the world would remember not just the goals, not just the scandals, but the spark, the beautiful, impossible, unforgettable spark. His boots were still, the cheers, fainter now. The dance that once lit up the world had slowed to a shuffle, uneven, fragile, human. Age caught him. So did regret. But in every bar, every barrio, every breath of football, the rhythm of Diego never truly stopped. He had always been a man of motion, not just the explosive sprint or the low center of gravity that made defenders tumble in his wake, but the restless energy that pulsed beneath his skin like a second heartbeat. Even in his quietest moments, there had always been an invisible rhythm, something just beneath the surface, urging him forward, sideways, somewhere, anywhere. But in the final years of his life, the rhythm changed. It became slower, unsteady, unfamiliar. His body, once the trusted vehicle of miracles, began to resist him. At first, it was subtle. A limp he blamed on the cold, a forgotten word brushed off with a joke, a wave of dizziness disguised behind sunglasses. But over time, denial gave way to reality. The dance was ending, and his body, for the first time, was no longer listening. He had never expected to age gracefully. That was never part of the script. Legends weren't meant to fade quietly. They were meant to explode, to burn, to remain forever in motion. Yet now, surrounded by the stillness of clinics and the sterile scent of hospital corridors, he began to understand that no fire burns forever, not even one as wild and relentless as his. The same legs that had once carried him through the mud of Fiorito, the chaos of Naples, the ecstasy of Mexico, now trembled beneath his weight. The same lungs that had roared in triumph, in fury, in defiance, now strained to deliver air with every breath. There were moments, brief and almost tender, where the defiance returned. He would pull on a Boca jacket and shuffle out to the pitch at Gymnasia, raising a hand to the chanting crowd, the same gesture he had made 1,000 times before. His name still echoed, louder than ever, but the man beneath the name had changed. He smiled, but the smile lingered shorter. He waved, but the arm dropped sooner. He spoke, but the voice, raspy, hesitant, barely made it to the microphone. Yet to those watching, he remained more than just a coach or a man. He was the embodiment of memory, of emotion, of something that once made them believe anything was possible. At night, alone in his room, the mask would fall. The crowds, the lights, the chants, all disappeared. In their place came silence. It was in that silence, lying beneath heavy blankets and surrounded by empty pill bottles and half-read books, that he confronted what he had spent a lifetime outrunning. Regret, fear, love, death. They came to him not as enemies, but as old acquaintances, pulling up a chair beside his bed and asking no questions. He would stare at the ceiling, listening to the quiet hum of the television in the other room, and think about things he rarely spoke of. His mother's hands, the smell of Naples after rain, the exact moment the ball left his foot against England. He would think about who he had been, who he might have been, and what remained of him now. He rarely left the house in Tigre during those last months. The press called it isolation. Some said he was hiding. Others whispered of addiction, of heartbreak, of paranoia. But inside the walls of that house, it was simpler than that. He was tired. not just of the body that betrayed him or the headlines that never stopped, but of the weight of being Maradona. It had been exhilarating, yes, the power, the glory, the love, but it had also been exhausting, like holding a spotlight that never dimmed, even when all he wanted was to sleep. His daughters became his anchors. Dalma and Janina came often, sometimes together, sometimes one at a time, always trying to bring a sense of normalcy into a world that had rarely known it. They brought him music he liked, showed him videos of his grandchildren, read him letters sent from fans across the globe. He would listen, sometimes with a soft smile, sometimes with tears he didn't bother to hide. One day, Janina placed a photo in his hand, a black and white image of him holding her as a baby, his eyes wild with joy, his shirt soaked in sweat. "You were already a god then," she said softly. He didn't look up, just stared at the image for a long time before finally whispering, "I was just a kid who couldn't stop running." The doctors came and went. Specialists from Buenos Aires, neurologists, cardiologists, dietitians. They brought charts and machines and gentle warnings. He listened, nodded, took the pills, ignored the advice. He had survived worse, after all. The cocaine, the overdoses, the near-death experiences in Punta del Este, Havana, Dubai. He had always found a way back. Why should this time be different? But it was. The comebacks grew slower. The light in his eyes dimmed a little more each week. The voice cracked more often. The laughter, once explosive and uncontrollable, turned into a thin wheeze, barely audible. He stopped watching full matches. Couldn't keep his attention long enough. Instead, he would replay clips. Old goals, old celebrations, grainy VHS recordings of Mexico '86. Sometimes he would ask his assistant to leave the room while he watched, as if the sight of himself in full flight, in full glory, was something too private, too sacred to be shared. There was one afternoon, not long before the end, when he sat by the window in his robe, watching the rain fall softly on the garden. A nurse brought him a cup of tea, but he didn't drink it. He just kept staring, eyes distant, breathing shallow. After a long pause, he said to no one in particular, "I miss hearing the ball hit the net." That sound. It meant I was alive. The nurse didn't respond, just placed the cup gently on the table and sat beside him in silence. His 60th birthday arrived like an echo. Tributes poured in from around the world. Messi, Pope Francis, the president of Argentina. Videos were broadcast. Former teammates sent flowers. Children gathered in Fiorito, holding posters and chanting his name as if time had never passed. But he wasn't well enough to celebrate. He made a short appearance at a match, waved weakly to the crowd, smiled faintly. The camera zoomed in on his face. The world saw it too. The tremor in his lips, the confusion in his eyes, the stiffness in his movements. He was there, but not fully. Present, but already part memory. In the final week, his daughters refused to leave his side. They took turns sleeping on the couch, checking his pulse, adjusting his pillows. They played him music, the old Argentine tangos he loved as a boy. Sometimes he hummed along. Sometimes he drifted off. One night, Dalma sat beside him and whispered, "You can rest now, Papa. You've done more than enough." He opened his eyes, looked at her for a long moment and said, "Did I make them happy?" She nodded, choking back tears. "You made them believe," she replied. On November 25th, 2020, the news came. Quietly at first, then like thunder rolling across continents. Diego Armando Maradona was gone. Cardiac arrest, age 60. Died in his sleep at home in Tigre. No scandal, no spectacle. Just the soft closing of a door, the final page in a story that had never paused for breath. Argentina went still. the streets filled with candles. Murals appeared overnight. Children painted number 10 on sidewalks. Grown men wept on television. Crowds gathered outside La Bombonera, singing his name until their voices cracked. Naples declared a day of mourning. In the Vatican, prayers were said, and in Villa Fiorito, where it had all begun, a group of boys played barefoot in the mud, yelling, "Maradona!" every time someone scored. The dance was over, but the rhythm remained. Not in his legs or lungs or fading heartbeat, but in the soil, in the stands, in the ball, in the dream. And somewhere, far from lights, far from pressure, far from pain, the boy who once kicked lemons barefoot through dirt roads danced once more. This time, forever free. He died, but he didn't leave. Not really. Murals rose, songs echoed, children still kicked worn-out balls in dusty streets, shouting his name. Diego wasn't just a memory. He was a feeling, a myth that moved, and somewhere between heaven and earth, between chaos and beauty, he still dances. They buried him with chants, not in whispers, not in silence, but in full voice, like a stadium roar that refused to end. Buenos Aires, on that November day, became something else entirely. A shrine, a drum, a body of millions moving not in grief alone, but in celebration of something they couldn't name but deeply felt. The kind of collective ache that only happens when a nation loses something it had come to believe would never die. The procession moved like a myth in motion. From Casa Rosada, where his coffin was laid in state beneath the painted ceilings and flags, to the streets choked with people pressing photographs, jerseys, and rosaries against the glass, to the endless flow of tears, songs, and fists raised skyward. It was not a funeral. It was an uprising of memory, of devotion, of longing. People climbed lampposts, hung from balconies, painted his name in blue across their foreheads. Old men, weeping, passed Boca shirts to their sons. Women held up portraits from the '86 World Cup, lips trembling. Someone threw a number 10 jersey onto the roof of the hearse. It stuck, flapping like a final banner as the car crawled through the sea of grief. And throughout it all, chants echoed, not in sadness, but in defiance of death. Ole, 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 Diego, Diego. There are men who are mourned. And then there are men who are remembered in songs. In the days that followed, Diego began to grow again, not in flesh, but in legend. In every corner of the world, new murals sprang up overnight. In Naples, artists painted his face on entire buildings. In Buenos Aires, schoolchildren drew him not as a man, but as a constellation. In La Paternal, someone left a football with flowers at the base of a traffic light and wrote, "He was the light." He became a candle on altars, a tattoo on thighs and forearms, a decal on buses, a name etched into fences, a nickname for newborns. He became omnipresent, not in physicality, but in spirit. In the way a child juggled a ball barefoot in a dusty alley. In the way a taxi driver argued, eyes wet, that no one had ever loved Argentina more than him. In the way strangers looked at each other and nodded, silently agreeing, we were lucky to be alive when he was. There were documentaries, statues, debates, tribute matches, candlelight vigils. The Vatican issued a formal prayer. Naples renamed their stadium. A priest in Rosario claimed he'd witnessed a miracle at Diego's grave. Someone swore the Virgin Mary was weeping in blue and yellow. Someone else heard him in the wind, whispering, "The ball doesn't get tired, I do." But all of that, the formal, the dramatic, the devotional, was still second to what truly endured. The feeling. The rush in your chest when you remember the run against England. The lump in your throat when you hear the crowd screaming his name. The joy, wild and irrational, that came simply from knowing he had once existed. There is something strange about a man who once walked among us suddenly becoming folklore. One day, he was sitting in a chair at the edge of a pitch in La Plata, barely able to stand, pointing toward midfield with eyes half closed. The next, he was everywhere. In memories, in myths, in the unprovable territory where gods tend to live. And yet, the transformation wasn't artificial. It had always been coming. Because Diego had never belonged entirely to the realm of the living. Even when he was alive, he was already a figure of worship. Not just for what he did with a ball, but for the way he embodied contradiction. He was fury and tenderness, vanity and humility, excess and emptiness, child and king, wound and healer. And in a world that so often demands clarity, he gave people permission to be gloriously complicated. No saint ever staggered out of a nightclub barefoot, waving to cameras with pupils like moons. No god ever admitted publicly, "I was broken, I made mistakes, and I would do it all again." And yet somehow Diego was both, not in spite of his flaws, but because of them. In a quiet part of Villa Fiorito, the dirt street where he first touched a ball has been renamed in his honor. The houses still lean against one another like tired bodies. Kids still chase worn-out balls into alleys. But there, on the wall of one cracked building, a mural stretches wide. His arms out, his gaze lifted, his mouth open in that impossible euphoric yell from 1986. An old woman sweeps her porch nearby. She remembers him. Not from television, but from before. "He used to kick a rock all the way to the store," she says without stopping. "Didn't need a ball. He made magic with anything." And when asked what she thought of all this, the murals, the pilgrimages, the songs, she just shrugged. "We knew he was special. The world found out late." Somewhere in a kitchen in Naples, a father is pointing at a cracked television screen, showing grainy footage of Diego weaving through defenders, ball glued to his left foot like it was stitched there by the divine. "You see that?" he says to his son. "That's not just football. That's love in motion." The boy, too young to have seen any of it live, nods solemnly. Later, he will watch the same clip again, alone. Not to study it, not to analyze it, but to feel it. Because that's what Diego left behind. Not just goals or trophies or stories of brilliance and madness, but a sensation, a heartbeat, a rhythm. And it keeps playing. In the end, immortality is not measured in statues or stadiums named in your honor. It's measured in the number of hearts you rearranged, the number of people who saw themselves in your triumphs and your falls, the number of lives you made brighter, even if only for a moment, because you existed. Diego Armando Maradona did that. For Argentina, for Napoli, for the forgotten, for the flawed. For anyone who ever felt like they had to fight too hard for joy. He was not perfect. He was not meant to be. He was something rarer, unforgettable. The world may try to move on. New stars will rise. Records will fall. But there will never be another day quite like June 22nd, 1986. Never another left foot that turned physics into poetry. Never another man who made both saints and sinners stand and cheer in the same breath. He was a moment, a movement, a miracle. And though the dance has ended, the music, oh, the music, will never stop. If this story stayed with you, even just a little, there are more to come. You're always welcome here. And if you want to walk with us through the forgotten, the legendary, the impossible, you know what to do. This is the Sport Whisper, and the next story is already waiting.